We're joined now by Scotland correspondent for the Sunday Times, John Bootham. John, the Greens said the SNP sold out future generations. Is that true?
Look, I think it's worth saying that this is an absolutely huge day in Scottish politics. The Greens have been in coalition with the SNP going back to August 2021. And for that, literally over the course of the last half a day, right, to be ditched, put in the bin, particularly when the Greens were thinking about doing that themselves, is huge. In the last hour, the Scottish Conservatives have announced that they're tabling a vote of no confidence in the First Minister, Humza Yousaf. That's going to take place probably next week. And you know what? It's nip and tuck, if you look at the arithmetic, whether him and his government survive.
Well, do you think if Humza Yousaf doesn't survive, what happens next? We're going to be thrown into more turmoil and more chaos.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if he were not to survive a vote of no confidence, the government would have 28 days in which to form another one. So there would need to be talks and negotiations round about that. As I say, that probably would take place next Tuesday. The SNP themselves have got an annual conference in August, so there might well, after such a thing happens possibly next week, be another leadership election to see who might replace him. But, you know, it's all pretty messy looking at the moment, and we'll just need to see how that transpires. Labour have just said, and asked Sarwar, their leader, that they would support a vote of no confidence in Humza tabled by the Conservatives. The Liberal Democrats would as well. It'll be down to the Greens, who are very, very, very angry today. They're enraged, finding out last night at 7 o'clock there was going to be a special meeting this morning of the Cabinet to find that, well, in that space of time, they're no longer in the government.
Well, Humza Yousaf seems to become public enemy number one in Scotland, but a lot of the policies that the Greens wanted, the Scottish people weren't happy with. That coalition couldn't really continue, could it?
Well, I'm sure the coalition could have continued. I mean, governments have difficulties all the time, but it's very certainly the case, I think, if you look at any of the recent opinion polls, that support for the Bute House Agreement, which was that agreement signed by the Greens and the SNP, is not as popular as it was when it was signed nearly 3 years ago. And a whole load of policies that Humza Yousaf espoused during his leadership election that the Greens would have supported in terms of, green policies for marine areas in Scotland, that fell by the wayside. The deposit return scheme about glass and other containers fell by the wayside because of a dispute with the UK government. Some of these things have gone. The big policies which caused the difficulty last week was the failure of the Scottish government to actually reach a whole series of climate targets. And last week they were forced to ditch a target by 2030 that 75% of green emissions in Scotland would have gone. So there's been huge problems in terms of the delivery of this government and in some of the policies, as you rightly point out, that the Greens support. And here we are today. I mean, Humza Yousaf claims that he's exercising true leadership by getting rid of the Greens. I think some of his parliamentary opponents have described, or I think somebody said to me, he's like Holyrood's Mr Bean.
That's very good. That's very good. Humza Yousaf, in office but not really in power, what has been the key mistakes he's made since he took over from Nicola Sturgeon?
I think, it's fair to say that Humza inherited a really poor legacy, not least that police investigation into what's happening with the SNP finances, which, as we all know, is still ongoing. Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, rearrested and charged with embezzlement last week, so that's still ongoing. He's not had the authority nor the grip that either of the two previous leaders of the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon or Alex Salmond, have had. And in the same sense, his approval ratings haven't really been as high as both of those people when they were in office. It's also fair to say that, there's been a big resurgence in support, particularly for the Labour Party, who they've been in the doldrums in Scottish politics in third place for a long time. And under Starmer and under Anas Sarwar, actually, by and large, since about the time of Liz Truss's demise, Labour have actually started creeping up to the point now in the last 3 opinion polls about the UK general election, Labour would actually eclipse the SNP in terms of numbers of seats. So Humza's not had his troubles to seek. He's been, as you say, not a man with authority and in control, and has really been a lot of the time really at a victim of events rather than somebody who's been in control of events.
Yeah, he inherited a raft of problems from Nicola Sturgeon, but ultimately he's kind of lacked the common touch with the Scottish people, and he lacks the charisma that Nicola Sturgeon had. I'm no fan of Nicola Sturgeon. Putting men in women's prisons is not something I can agree with, but generally speaking, she had the common touch. People believed what she said.
Yeah, look, she was a hugely effective communicator, probably one of the best communicators that we've seen in recent years in UK politics, rather than just Scottish politics. She inherited a fantastic legacy in 2014 when she took over the SNP. She was the longest serving First Minister. She had what people would have probably described it, and this is probably not the right description, she had a good COVID period in charge. But after that, things started to go downhill. Humza's government really has a reputation more than anything else for failure to delivery. It keeps running into a whole series of problems. People think they've got the wrong priorities. That stuff that you were talking about gender reform, identity politics, the hate crime bill hasn't gone as well as it might have gone. They've made a number of mistakes, for example, over that big issue about the over budget and over time ferries in the west of Scotland, which have affected lots of islanders. So lots of unpopular things lots of unpopular things for this government, things not going in his direction. And again, this has led to, look, for the first time now in 2007, we face a real prospect of the SNP facing a major setback in Scottish politics. If Labour were to eclipse them during the general election, that would be huge. And the big election after that is the 2026 Holyrood election, where again, Labour would be expecting to do quite well at the expense of the SNP. And all of this is all in the lead. I mean, we've got a general election possibly less than 6 months ahead, and then the SNP's in its worst place than it's been for more than a decade.
Well, stay with us, John, because we're going to discuss the high rate taxpayers in Scotland moving south of the border. Treasury analysis has found that some 1,000 people left the country after income bans were increased. What do you think of this, John?
Look, I think it's probably worth a wee bit of background on this. We now find ourselves in a situation where Scotland has 6 income tax bans, whereas in England and Wales there are only 3. At the top end, there is a huge difference in the top 2 bans between what people pay in income tax compared to south of the border. So nobody should be surprised at the end of the day if these things have a result. I think not just is the system, more progressive, as it would be called, and that's something Humza Yousaf is very, very proud of, but it's actually much more complicated a system than elsewhere. And I think the result of that is, despite the fact that the government suggests that, this is something that people in the country support, it doesn't really raise that much extra income in terms of money that is needed for public spending. It's difficult to say, even looking back over the past couple of years, I think some people might have expected a bigger effect in the number of people who would have left the country or have been prepared to come to the country to work. But I don't think there's any doubt there's a problem with it. If you're out of kilter in these kind of things with the rest of the UK, I think it's problematic.
Well, John, I'm glad you think that the English tax system is simple. I can't get my head around it. I don't know how much I should be paying and when. I'm always being chased by the tax man. But would it not make sense for us to have one tax for all 3, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, just one set rate for everyone?
I think if what you're saying is that the basis of the tax system in terms of the way it's constructed is that it should be the same in Scotland in terms of the number of tax bands, for example, then I think that might find some echo with some people in Scotland. I think, as I say, the difficulty is we've now got this hugely complicated system, which at the end of the day doesn't raise that much extra money. And, you know, that's what a lot of this is about at the end of the day. How do you raise cash for struggling public services?
All right. Thank you very much, John Bootham. A pleasure to speak to you.